Welcome, everyone. So here we are. It's our 7th Salon of the Maternal Gift Economy Breaking Through series, hosted by Genevieve Vaughn, who is with us today, and the International Feminists for the Gift Economy. I am Letitia Layson, your moderator. We're delighted to have you with us today. And our guests are Peggy Antrobus, who is calling in from Barbados. She'll be on in a moment, and Erella Shadmi. Both of our speakers will give their talks, which will be followed by a Q&A, and Genevieve, since she's with us, will be available also. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A icon. That's where you can put your questions. We'll have somebody monitoring the chat as well, but it's easier to find the questions if you put them in the Q&A. The chat box is going to remain open. I know some of you might be distracted by the chat, so you can close it down and not be distracted. We're going to be together for a couple of hours. The first hour is going to be the talks, and the second hour is going to be our Q&A. So please make sure you're comfortable, take care of your body, stretch and move around. You know you're at home. Be sure that you have water, hydrate well. Today's salon is going to be recorded and will be available for viewing at our website, the Maternal Gift Economy Movement.org. We're going to start today with Urella. Dr. Urella Chadney is an Israeli feminist, peace activist, anti-racism activist, and scholar. She is the head of the Women's Studies program at Fayette Burrell College and a Fulbright Fellow at the University of Minnesota. Today, she's involved in building police stations for women victims of male violence, a feminist center for women's art and cultures, and a shared home for elder women, single mothers, and violence survivors. Welcome, Urella.
Thank you, Letitia. I want to refer to the COVID pandemic, but before that, I want to begin by expressing my deep gratitude to my teacher and sister in the maternal gift economy movement and the Modern Matriarchal Studies Network. As a sociologist, I see myself as an observer of social processes and a translator of the wisdom of these women to the world we live in. As an activist, and I am first and foremost an activist, I am a dreamer. I wish to open the eyes and hearts of women and men to ways of thinking, doing, and living according to what I learned from observation and the knowledge my friends taught me, how ideas may be translated into practices. Take for example, the thousands of people across the globe, from Poland, Serbia, Israel, Spain, to the US and Germany, who went to the streets to protest the failures of the state, the growing authoritarianism, the corruption, or the lockdown policies of governments during the COVID pandemic. Despite the health danger and police brutality, they keep on protesting as, so I suggest, they begin to apprehend the multi-layered crisis, perhaps the collapse that Western culture has been facing for quite a while, and its devastating impact on individual security. The outcry of the masses does not stand alone. In Israel, several protest movements are concurrently active. Netanyahu supporters demanding a more just legal and law enforcement system, as well as spatial justice. Ultra-Orthodox Jewish people Jewish groups violating the pandemic safety instructions, demonstrating mistrust of the secular authorities, which may drastically alter their relations with non-Orthodox sectors. Israeli Palestinians demanding security and police protection. Though the protesters are different in many ways, there is one line connecting all of them: mistrust of capitalism and governments. In the same way, one may understand the January 6th attack on the Capitol not only as a consequence of Trumpism, but as one of several public outcries in the US: Black Lives Matter, Occupy Wall Street, and George Floyd killing by the police. The 2008 protest in Greece, Spain, and France following the global economic crisis may be added to. If we use a larger lens, various protests may be understood as a reaction to the multi-layered crisis Western civilization is facing, encompassing climate decay, relentless and predatory capitalism, consumerism, social inequality, racism, sexism, poverty, transhumanism with its apocalyptic vision that could lead to the destruction of our outer space, and last but perhaps a key crucial factor, the personal sense of insecurity, of bare life, standing alone without the protection of family, trade union, community, or the privatized state. It seems that Western way of knowing, being, and doing, despite its intellectual and technological achievements, is unable to properly understand or react to the new challenges. The rise of autocratic and populist regimes is therefore not surprising. In response to this multi-layered crisis, social change activists around the globe since the beginning of the 21st century have already started to build a new world from below. Gift economy initiatives, communes, alternative families, eco-villages, cooperatives, independent media and knowledge centers, and other social institutions. However, the conservative political forces have been strong enough to preserve Western and white supremacy, neoliberalism, inequalities, racism, and sexism. We needed a global crash to make many more people around the globe realize that a comprehensive shift is necessary. The pandemic fully exposed the social injustices, corruption of values, and the ineffectiveness of the state, raising consciousness about the elderly, the poor, and the homeless. This understanding is what keeps thousands of people in the streets. This understanding, unfortunately, also drives others to engage in black market and economic violence. However, it may be that the COVID pandemic is actually laying the groundwork for extricating ourselves from the crisis. More and more scholars and activists question the rationale of Western civilization, its institutions and ideas, including the state, nationalism, capitalism, enlightenment, and socialism. Consequently, the collapse of democracy in many countries, including Israel, of course, is not the root of the evil, but the culmination of cultural decay that began with colonialism and imperialism, not to mention genocide. Yet, its roots are even deeper and may be traced to the beginning of patriarchy, founded on the negation and destruction of matriarchy, the oppression of women and their housewifization. Patriarchy began to develop the culture of war, the perception of Mother Nature as dead matter, and the belief that man is able to create a better life, even a post-human person. Western capitalism and culture are its current performance. If we understand that crisis has to do with the broad context that is the crisis of Western civilization, we also need to understand the change we are striving is the construction of an alternative system, including a new way of thinking, a new value system, and a new social order that reigns state control in the hands of the people themselves. A few interesting and important proposals for change have recently been introduced. The LEAP in Canada, the plural economy, the communal states in Venezuela, the reconstruction of the state, and others. Though I see the relevance and contribution, I'm not sure they are sensitive enough to the need for intersectional change, to feminist and women perspective and needs, and to a non-Western outlook that is matriarchal and indigenous wisdom. I think the thousands of people shouting in the streets also understand the changes, what changes are needed, as demonstrated by the vast voluntarism, reluctance to practice social distancing, and distrust of the authorities, and insistence on protesting. There also grasps the meaning of the alternative, the gift economy rather than capitalism, communalism rather than individualism, and grassroots voice and participative democracy rather than the political system and the powerful state. These groups are engaging voluntarily, providing food and support to the many who lost their jobs and livelihood. They understand the weakness and incompetence of state institutions and capitalism, and the strengths and crucial significance of the gift economy, as well as relationship and interconnectedness. The crash drove them to join the above-mentioned activists suggest engage in rebuilding the alternative world from below. It is our responsibility to encourage this step forward so that these activists will internalize the deep meaning of their actions. This is necessary to prevent powerful forces, the emergency measures they impose on us, and the corporate regime from appropriating these changes for their own interests, as they have been doing for generations. See, for example, how the welfare state and the move towards liberation in the 1950s and 1960s turned into neoliberalism. It is important, therefore, to conceptualize them as part of an alternative paradigm. This paradigm contains the main features of both the new activism and the protesters. It is also important that the paradigm be outside and beyond white Western culture, patriarchy, and capitalism. Without changing the paradigm, social context, and values, the capitalist principles of exchange, individualistic interest, and power over others will continue to dominate. The paradigm I suggest begin with re-understanding motherhood and mothering, a concept or experience that might seem irrelevant to people dealing with economy and capitalism, as patriarchy has taught us for ages. Yet, this is a misunderstanding, in fact, a distortion of motherhood, mothering, and motherliness. For example, long and short-term planning is what mothers do all the time, consciously or not. Even King Salomon acknowledged what he called mother's wisdom, which he said is much more crucial than father's morality, but is totally ignored by social scientists, economists, and administrators. And it should be acknowledged, most mothers are usually doing a good job. Yes, I wish to propose here, following my maternal teachers, that an understanding of mothering, what mothers do, the legacy of mothers, can be a starting point for a paradigm shift and a profound response to the global crisis in which we are all trapped. Improving, humanizing, or recovering capitalism, the nation state, and liberalism are insufficient now, as has been revealed in South Africa. Mandela managed to end the apartheid regime and establish a constitution and human civil rights in South Africa, but he failed to establish social justice, to properly enforce the constitution, or to eradicate poverty among the blacks. According to Zizek, an influential Slovenian cultural critic, such disappointment is not uncommon following the election of left-wing leaders. Therefore, he says, and I quote, liberating radical politics faces its greatest challenge: how to keep acting after the first wave of enthusiasm subsides, how to take the next step without giving in to the disastrous temptation of totalitarianism. End of quote. I conceptualize and generalize motherliness and mothering as a significant human practice and all human logic, reflected and realized everywhere, in every area, which we sometimes perhaps fail to recognize. This understanding leads to the integration of three sources of knowledge. First, the maternal gift economy, that is the unilateral provisioning of goods and services in response to the needs of others. The market exchange the market exchange exploits and depends on it. The human being is conceived as homo donans, the giving human being. Second, past and present patriarchal society that are mother-centered society based on local communities, maternal values, caring and nurturing, motherliness, peace building, and balance. Third, the rich indigenous knowledge, including, for example, Ubuntu, the South African concept, I am because you are, or I am because I belong, or the wisdom that views nature as a living entity to be respected and protected. A community is essential for survival. Life is sustained through balance and harmony. These three sources of inspiration, which go beyond the common Eurocentric worldview, share a set of perception structures, practices, and values. Together, they lead to a new way of thinking and a new paradigm, allow us to find our way out of patriarchal order and begin to build, begin to build a different world whose foundations are needs, community, sharing, consensual decision-making, inclusion, giving, connectedness, spirituality, reconciliation, peace, balance, and respect for nature. I do not naively think that such change would occur immediately or that there would be no opposition to it, even violent. However, the new activism prevalent in large part of the Western world, with examples like Kurdish Rojava and other matriarchal society existing today, and the wind blowing in some South American countries, for example, solidarity economy, Buen Vivir, and the communal state of Venezuela, as well as the penetration of indigenous thinking into science and university, all testify that this direction of change is possible, and in fact already began. Thank you.
Thank you, Urella. That was a beautiful overview of tying together this common pandemic that we're facing and what's rising out of it, and pointing to the fact that we need to look beyond our Eurocentric, capitalistic Western point of view. Now we have, at this point, Peggy Antrobus. She's calling in from Barbados. Peggy identifies as a Caribbean feminist activist. Since the mid-1970s, she's been involved in programs to advance women's rights, first within the structure of government, later within the academy, and now as part of a feminist-led global women's movement. Peggy's most significant and life-changing experience has been being part of the network of the feminist researchers, activists from the economic South, advancing development alternatives with women for a new era. Her interest in the gift economy came from the realization of the fact that much of what allows Caribbean people and economies to survive and thrive takes place outside the market, grounded in social relationships of reciprocity and solidarity. Today, in the context of COVID-19 pandemic, in which gifting and women's caring labor, much of it unwaged or low-waged, is the basis of survival for communities, even whole countries. Peggy is interested in how the value of these practices might finally be recognized, acknowledged, and reinforced through policies that support rather than continue to exploit this essential work. Welcome, Peggy.
Thank you very much, Letitia, and let me apologize for the fact that I couldn't join earlier. I was desperately trying to get connected, but it's the challenge that I have with this technology. So, as you probably explained, my presentation was to come first, to be followed by Erella's, and now the universe has determined otherwise. And in a sense, I think my presentation represents an example of how we might survive this crisis of Western civilization, because I absolutely agree with Urella that we are in crisis, and an example of how people, Caribbean people, have learned for generations to survive the most horrendous of circumstances, all the way from genocide, the genocide of the communities that lived in these islands before the Europeans came, and slavery, the conditions which were imposed on these islands by the Europeans. But let me begin with how I started taking an interest in this gift economy. So when I won a scholarship to go to university in the 1950s, I chose to read for a degree in economics because I thought that economics would give me a way of contributing to Caribbean development. Now, this was on the eve of our independence, so it was a very exciting time, and a 17, 18-year-old thought that if I studied economics at university, I would have the tools to make that contribution. But it didn't take me long after graduation and my first job, which was with the Ministry of Finance in Jamaica, to realize that mere classical economics couldn't explain how our economies worked. Then I discovered feminism, and that compounded the problem. Clearly, the energy that enabled Caribbean people to survive and thrive didn't come from the economy, in inverted commas, but from social relations centered on women, those social relations that sustained us. So what caught my attention when I first heard Jen talk about the gift economy was that it seemed to get at that point, the unilateral giving of mothering highlighted for me the social relations and their underlying values of caring for the self and others, cooperation and solidarity. Giving and receiving clearly is a law of nature, as natural as breathing. It's what makes us human. And that really is what it's all about. So now I want to look at some slides. If I could have the first slide, it's the map of the Caribbean. So let us start there. These small islands of the Caribbean are peaks and lava flows of underwater volcanic eruptions, the coral reefs, the sands from coral reefs. They form a chain, an archipelago separating the Atlantic from the Caribbean Sea. Next slide. The next slide shows the indigenous people of the Caribbean were Caribs and Arawaks, originally from South America. They formed communities on these islands before Columbus lost his way and stumbled on them in his search for a Western passage to India. We must remember that Columbus did not discover them. They were there before he came upon them. We must remember that it wasn't his cleverness, but he lost his way. And you can see that he was greeted with gifts. Next slide. A Guyanese friend of mine who works with indigenous people told me that the word gift, as we use it in English, really doesn't correspond with the indigenous concept. She said that pre-Columbian indigenous communities were actually trading communities, not so much gifting communities. Nevertheless, the indigenous cultures of Guyana are communal. So lands are communally held, and all decisions concerning use, allocation, management, and monitoring of lands and resources can easily be done collectively. Can only be done collectively, can only be done collectively, and can only be made by applying what they call free, prior, and informed consent, a concept actually adopted by the United Nations. It's a reminder, I think, of the difficulty of trying to fit the lived experience of different realities into the concepts, theories, and analyses of Western industrialized societies. And yet, that's what we have to do. We have to continue to try to do that, which is what I'm trying to do with the ideas of the gift economy. Next slide. So with the arrival of the European conquerors, the indigenous people of the Caribbean experienced the same replacement as those of other parts of the Americas, except that in these islands, with the discovery of green gold, sugarcane, they were replaced by Africans enslaved and brought across the Atlantic to work on the plantations. And clearly this is a slide of a slave auction. Plantation slavery was something new in the history of humankind. The dehumanization and commoditization of communities of people marked the beginning of what we now term extractivism, starting with the exploitation of the human body itself. Exploitation on a massive global stage, maybe the first setting what we now call globalization. Next slide, please. So we see a sugar plantation, and what made Europe the source of Europe's wealth, the exploitation of these lands, green gold as it's called. So now I can go back, Diane, to the slide before. And I want to argue that yet in the midst of this unimaginable cruelty and brutality, the enslaved found ways of expressing their humanity towards each other. Away from the eyes of their oppressors, they cared for each other, tending to wounds, physical wounds, emotional wounds, psychic wounds, and nurturing the social relations that would allow them to survive. That's how they survived slavery. Next slide. Then came emancipation. With the abolition of slavery and emancipation, these people created communities and new forms of families. Of course, after the ending of slavery, we had indenture, the transportation of the migration of bringing of thousands of people from India to the island. So we were also had Indians in the mix. But I want to suggest that we West Indians are a Creole people. We are from Africa, Asia, Europe, from the Middle East, the Lebanese, from China. All of these nations came to the Caribbean. And we are a combination of all of these nations. And yet we are none of these. We are, in fact, I would argue, in the Caribbean, a new people. Next slide. So when I first heard about the gift economy, I tried to get some case studies of these experiences in the Caribbean. And one of the first examples that I got was from a woman from a village in St. Vincent. And it's the gift of fire. We see here a picture of a coal pot. And when I was a child, that's how we cooked on these coal pots. With charcoal, and you light the fire. And the story was that the first person to light their fire in the morning would take a piece of the charcoal to a neighbor. And so it spread throughout the community, symbolically spreading light, warmth, the means of nourishment, caring, and community. Next slide, please. The typical family, Caribbean family, extends beyond kinship. As I say, we created new forms of family. We have a word in the Caribbean, family, F-A-M-B-L-I, describing a family beyond kinship, beyond the distances of space as well. The transnational family, the Caribbean diaspora. Next slide. So the Caribbean diaspora is spread all over the world. I don't know of a single country, apart from maybe Russia, where there are not groups and communities of Caribbean people. The connections are strong. They're nurtured mostly by women. People return every year to the Caribbean. They return around traditional holidays like Christmas and Carnival, and some specially created holidays, created to draw them back in large numbers. One of the latest was just last year in Barbados, a gathering called We Gathering, We Gathering. And the idea was to bring people back each month, focusing on one parish. So all the people from Christchurch or St. George would come back in that month, and they would interact with their brethren and sisterin, their families, and there would be a gathering. But of course, that was interrupted by COVID. But it will continue once we get our borders open again and we get control of this pandemic. Next slide. Well, when Caribbean people migrate, as is the case, I think, with people from all over the world, certainly Letitia, the Philippines, Africa, Asia, family members regularly send remittances. In some small communities, remittances are in fact the main source of income. We could even call them remittance communities. I once heard a sociologist describe different types of communities, and one of the types of communities was a remittance community. In a way, you can say that these communities are gift economies existing within what is essentially a market economy. Next slide. And here we have a barrel. I have to tell you something about the barrel. So a very common practice when people, particularly when women migrate, leaving their children and elderly relatives behind, is the barrel trade. They buy a barrel and they put it in their living room or in their bedroom if they're in a bed sitter. And into this barrel, they place things, items that they get from sales. Now, this barrel is not really representative because this barrel is full of food stuff. And there's that kind of barrel trade as well, people that buy food stuff and send them to their families. But I'm talking about the kind of barrel into which people put items of clothing, shoes, but also some essentials for their families. And many families exist again, in not just with the cash that is sent in remittances, but from these barrels, these representations of family. Next slide. Another story I got when I was looking for examples of the gift economy in the Caribbean was a very interesting one, because I'm particularly interested in the examples where there's a combination of the exchange economy, capitalism, that within that kind of economy, you have a different kind of economy. And the story is a story of people in the diaspora missing their familiar food, missing their food, missing their ground provisions. We call yams and potatoes and dasheen and eddos, we call them ground provisions. The plantains, the pepper sauce, the jerked meats, the smoked meats, the guava jelly, the various sweets, sugar cakes, peanut brittle, guava cheese, the breads, Jamaica's hard dough bread, Jamaica Easter bun, patties from Jamaica, and niche market. That's what it is, niche market. And what we have here is the niche market, the Kensington market in Toronto. The process starts with the recognition of the potential for that niche market in Brooklyn, Scarborough, London, Paris, New York, wherever. I'm sure you could find a Caribbean market in China. Then the identification of a suitable location for a shop or a store. Then the contact with the potential suppliers. Then the shipping, the clearance, the delivery, the finance. All of these are tasks that could require thousands of dollars to set up, to create this market, supply this market. But it's often done with the exchange of very little money, if any, by family. Next slide. And then every year there's a hurricane season. There's a little verse that we say, June too soon, July stand by, August come it must, September remember, October all over. Except that the hurricanes now go on into November and even December because of climate change. Climate change is an existential threat to our economies. It makes hurricanes more intense and more deadly. In one single day, in an afternoon, a hurricane can destroy and has destroyed 60% of the banana crop that supports 75% of the economy. A nutmeg tree destroyed by a hurricane in Grenada some years ago takes 15 years to bear fruit. And of course, there are floods and droughts and rising sea level. The crisis is happening now. It's not something in the future. It's happening right now. Well, when disaster strikes, the diaspora mobilizes support. Next slide. GoFundMe facilitates the reach and the amounts of relief, and nothing demonstrates the importance, the power of social relations as the mobilization of gifts, support that flows to the region from the diaspora family as hurricane relief. It's often the most important relief people receive. It often includes items that are seldom on the list of relief agencies. Soap, diapers, sanitary napkins, pots and pans. These are items that are seldom part of the list of relief agencies or governments, and they're items identified by the women. And it's women's organizations in the Caribbean and women in the diaspora that are often the leaders in this kind of relief. Next slide. The relief efforts on the ground bring people together across class and racial divides, clearing debris, rebuilding houses, clearing land. People in the Caribbean know how to look after each other, how to help each other. Next slide. And then came COVID. And then came COVID. Another disaster, a consequence of the arrogance of extractivism, the intrusion of nature by capitalism. So we have, as many people say, and as Erella said, the pandemic has turned our lives upside down, shutting down the tourism-based economies of the Caribbean, exposing and exacerbating existing inequalities. We may all be in the storm together, but we are not all in the same boat. And only some survive unscathed. In nearly a year of economic collapse, the gift economy is what keeps people going in the Caribbean. In the case of Barbados, a little island, less than 500,000 people, population, in fact, of just over 250,000, it starts with the government, led by a woman whose election slogan was Mia Cares. Her name is Mia Amor Motley. And I characterize her approach to the pandemic as Mia's heads above water approach. Heads above water because she kept insisting that we care for each other, that we look out for each other. First of all, she didn't just address the pandemic. She took a multi-sectoral approach. She understood that we were in the middle of an IMF agreement, so we had a debt problem in Barbados, we had an economic problem, we had a climate crisis. Barbados could disappear under the water. And we had a public health crisis. And so she dealt with that public health crisis in a very comprehensive way, prioritizing, first of all, families, low-income families. And she created an account in one of the banks called Adopt a Family. And then she challenged Barbadians who earned above a certain amount of money. And she challenged companies to put money into that account. So we had the Adopt a Family. But in addition, of course, the usual COVID relief to people who had lost their jobs. But in the case of Barbados, not just people who had lost their jobs, but people who were in the informal sector and had no access to unemployment benefits, to non-contributory pensioners. In other words, pensioners that were too poor to have any income whatsoever. And that spirit of solidarity and caring extended throughout the community with the distribution of food hampers and all the ways that all of us know that communities are taking care of each other during this terrible time. COVID reveals the worst and the best of who we are. So here I come to my closing remarks, and I'd like to have the next slide. Final slide. Yeah. So the search for a new economic theories and a new development paradigm, as Erella was saying, that addresses the increasing structural inequalities and the environmental degradation goes back many years to the 1960s. And I want to say that this search, I think, has gained new energy with the debates on climate change. Urella mentioned the solidarity economies, Buen Vivir in Ecuador. But I think that today, in the context of the global pandemic, people are more open to these ideas. They're more open to ideas that in the past were considered fringe ideas, crazy even. And these include ideas that have actually been gaining traction in the past few years in the context of climate change. We have the concept, we have Bhutan's happiness index. We have the concept of the care economy. And we have something that I've just discovered called the Wellbeing Alliance that includes something called donut economics. It's an alliance of countries, cities, and even economic enterprises that promote the goal of well-being and ecological sustainability over economic growth as an end in itself. And I think the gift economy can be an important contribution to this search for a new paradigm, a new vision. Its underlying values of generosity and caring, sharing, cooperation, solidarity, all of these are embodied in the good social relationships, and they are everywhere. They are everywhere. However, they're often invisible, overlaid by years, by generations of bad, dehumanizing experiences, driven by individualism, selfishness, greed, neglect, egotism. The idea of the gift economy allows us to remember and look for its underlying values, to affirm them, to support them, not only through our own efforts, but particularly by promoting the policies that would support rather than continue to exploit them. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. That was beautiful. I love that last slide. I've been locked down since March of last year, and I really miss the ocean. So it's made me feel so comfortable as my family also coming from an island. The two, your two talks together with Erella were so amazing in the way that while Erella is not officially an island in Israel, it's often isolated in the way that of its neighbors. So an island to itself. And often we isolate, you talk about the individualism and how we need to break through. But Genevieve, before we actually get to the questions, I wondered if perhaps you might have any comments about the talks together before we actually break in? Or maybe you have a question that you'd like to ask these two women yourself.
Thank you so much, Peggy and Erella, for your wonderful talks. And I think particularly Peggy shows how we can be thinking about the gift economy right now, whereas Erella is looking at a bigger picture, let's say more theoretical look at the economy as a whole and as our well, the whole cultural context. And for me, it really is a question of going back to what we all have in common, and that is a mother and the model of the mother that we have. Everybody has it that survives because somebody had to take care of them. So everybody has experienced this unilateral mothering. And so that model is what we need to bring forward to change our society away from the terrible kinds of interactions that capitalism has and patriarchy have given us of using the interactions of violence against each other rather than the interactions of gifting. So I appreciate so much the context you all have given for these thoughts. And I'm interested also in hearing what questions people may come up with.
Thanks, Jen. So with that, Liliana, are you ready for our first question?
Yes, I have a question for Erella. The question is from Mary D. It says, for Erella, how are policemen reacting to your project of policewomen and domestic violence in Israel?
Well, what a question, you know, I'm writing a big article about it right now. So, well, the Israel police is exactly like, on one hand, exactly like all other police forces in the West. They deal very poorly with violence against women. They are also, don't forget, involved very much into the occupation of the Palestinians. So they bring in the way they police Palestinians inside Israel and in the territories. They bring into the country, but they've never been a great. Well, that's why we have feminist organizations, you know, and that's why I'm writing so many papers, articles against the police, critical of the police, and yeah, I don't know. That's it, I guess.
Urella, do you have any articles in English about this topic, and maybe about your project that we might be able to share with people who are our listeners?
The project about women's police stations?
Yes, the project that you.
It's a South American. Originally, it comes from South America. It began in Brazil in 1985. What I'm trying to do is convince the Israeli police that deal really poorly with cases of violence against women to adapt this very long, very old kind of practice. I mean, really, police stations that deal only with violence against women, with women's victims. And it comes from South America. South America knows, I mean, South American women know it much better than than I do. But I think it's interesting that it comes from Brazil, and it's spread all around South America and South Africa, and it comes also from India, but there's none in Western countries. We think we are better. We're never better. So I hope it's very difficult to convince the police, but there's some senior officer, really senior, police officers that open their ears and their heart, and they, I hope the cooperation with them will be, successful.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Judith, do you have a question for us?
You've both described yourselves as activists, so I wonder if each of you could give further examples of your activism and of actions that you've taken and what their outcomes were.
Peggy?
Peggy, would you like to go first?
Right, I will start. So my activism actually came with my feminism. And I would say that it goes back to the late 70s, because when I first got involved in working on women's issues, I was no activist. I was actually very conservative. I worked I set up the Women's Bureau with the government of Jamaica. My experience at that point had been working with governments. But feminism really, I think, turned me into an activist. And I know I'm an activist because it's a lifelong passion. I've been officially retired for the last 30 years, and look at me at this stage of my life, still trying to figure out how to use this opportunity to make things different. The kind of activism that I'm more familiar with myself is not the activism of organizing on the streets, although I've done that. But I've been mostly involved in, I wouldn't even say research, in analysis of the conditions under which that shape women's lives, particularly the analysis coming from this network of third world activist scholars, DAWN, Development Alternatives for a New Era. It was started in 1985, just at the end of the UN Decade for Women. And so my activism has mostly been doing that analysis and figuring out ways in which to lobby governments to change normative frameworks and to follow up and see how they get to be implemented. Right now, one of the things I'm doing is trying to be involved in a bit of research that is going to pay attention to what governments are actually doing as they try to recover from COVID, and to see if in what they're doing there are any clues whatsoever to suggest that they might be trying something different. I fully expect there to be tremendous pushback. In Barbados, even though the government might have a lot of goodwill, and by the way, Barbados is no paradise despite the lovely picture I showed you, but there are at least, I think, 3 or 4 options we could think of. We could think of the situation could actually get worse, and that's more likely than not to happen. That is, because the economies have collapsed and the governments are strapped for cash, they're going to turn to the banks and the corporations. And those corporations are going to have even more control than they did before. So in a sense, not only will it not help, but it'll continue to make things worse. Another way could be, as I think Erella hinted at that too, the way in which some governments, not the government of Barbados, I want to emphasize, is using this as an opportunity to control people, to increase their control over people, to become more authoritarian. A third option could be that we could actually try to do something something a little differently. And that's where I'm pinning my hope. And that's, you know, I'm an eternal optimist. So my activism has changed over the years. It's very much related to where I am, who I am, where I am, what my particular skills are, and my particular opportunities are.
Thank you, Peggy. Erella, how about you?
Okay, I'll just say a few examples. First, I see my writing and scholarship as part of my activism, not the other way around. I write and publish to change the world. It's part of my activism. It's the same as I want my perspective or my way of seeing the world to be written, to be communicated to large audience. So this is really very important. Now it's very important part of my activism. But I've been first I began as a peace activist, as a child, as a matter of fact. I was in a leftist youth movement, and we went to protest the way the Palestinians were oppressed by Israelis, and I'm talking before '67 war. As a child, as a teenager, it was part of my life. And then when I grew up, I was part of Women in Black movement that started in Jerusalem. So I was, I'm one of my, one of my really important and meaningful experiences was to be a member of Women in Black, which is now, you know, a global movement against militarism and against war and against nuclear arms and everything. But also, I'm one of the one of the co-organizer of the Jerusalem Feminist Center in 1994. I am I was the and I've been involved in many feminist activists, including the Palestinian. I joined Palestinian women in their demonstrations. I got some eggs on my back. It was very, very painful, believe me. Yeah, and it was for me the peace activism is part of feminism. Also, when I was working at the police headquarters, the Israeli police headquarters, I brought into the police feminism. And many of my colleagues, women colleagues, were very opposed to me, very critical for me of bringing feminism into the police. And I'm talking about the 1980s, which is, you know, it was the, and then, I don't know, many other initiatives and involvement and demonstrations and shouting, take back the night, you know, demonstrations. And so this is in short.
Thanks, Urella. Jen, would you like to input here? You bring us together as activists in the way that we very vocally speak about the gift economy whenever and wherever we can. So I want to make sure that we identify that. And Peggy, I see your hand is up.
Yes.
After Jen talks, let's come back to you.
I would just like to say that I think activism is an attempt to give the gift of social change. It's an attempt to solve a problem or maybe many problems. And whether you do it on the streets or you do it through writing or organizing or creating conferences on economics or whatever you may be doing, that is really the purpose of activism, is to solve a problem and to give a gift. So I think we need to see the gifts where they are and where we're actually giving them. We may call it something else, but we need to start calling it gifting.
Thanks, Jen. Peggy, let's come back to you.
Thank you very much, Jen, for that. And it gives me an opportunity to mention another very important part of my activism, which is institution building. I have, and teaching, but I have been involved in starting a number of small institutions that are feminist in their orientation. I won't go into the details, but I just wanted to note that teaching and institution building, I agree, are also part of what my activism has been about. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, one of my early mentors said that for some of us, teaching is the most potent form of activism that we can do by affecting the minds of many young people. So wherever you are, in whatever situation, formally or informally, I hope you assert your activism to grow the new edge of thinking minds. So Liliana, do you have another question for us?
I do. I have a question from Marcella Clark for Peggy. She says, thank you for a beautifully informed presentation. Can you please speak about the state of education in the Caribbean, starting with the very young and vulnerable, and any correlations with the gift economy? I can repeat the question.
I'll try. Yes, I've got it. Education, okay. Well, I've got to, again, everything, I always have to go back to slavery and emancipation. And education really, coming out of slavery, education really was the key. Of course, the early schools, many of them started by, informally by women. Those were the earliest schools, teaching their own children and those in the neighborhood. But the churches were very involved in setting up schools, and then, of course, the governments. And education, I suppose, is part of nation building in the Caribbean. But it has always been a major sector. And a lot of the social change and a lot of the social justice in the Caribbean has come through education. In Barbados, for instance, after independence, one of the first things that the Prime Minister did was to institute free secondary education and even free tertiary education. Of course, again, with the economic crisis, that has changed. But Caribbean people have always looked to education as a very important vehicle and means of getting out of poverty and improving their lives. Of course, I have to acknowledge that some of that education is not really very helpful because, as I said at the beginning, going to the university, you learn stuff that has nothing to do or doesn't help you to do anything about changing the parameters of your life. So I want to be kind of critical about education and to say that educational reform would have to be part of what has to happen. And the kind of teaching that I'm doing is always to get people to think critically. Critical thinking is where we start to liberate our minds from mental slavery, as Bob Marley would put it. Was there another part of that, or?
No,
by the way, I don't know whether the questioner is Marcella Clark is actually my sister-in-law, but I have a sister-in-law by that name. But I'm surprised to know that she's on this call.
Thank you, Peggy. Urella, do you have some words that you'd like to share about this question from your point of view in Israel and your experience in the world?
About education? About education, you mean?
Let Liliana ask the question again. She'll say it again so you can share your point of view. Liliana, can you read the question one more time?
Can you please speak about the state of education in Israel, starting with the very young and vulnerable, and any correlations with the gift economy?
Well, well, the education system is not so great in Israel. Let's put it this way. I think I see the teacher as gift givers. I think the teachers are I really appreciate what the teachers are doing, the way they give. This is a kind of a gift giving. I don't that despite despite the fact that the system is not not the best one, not like Finland, for example, or something like that. And we have many problems with, and you know, and the rich kids go to private schools instead of going to the government schools, but that's why I see the teacher themselves as gift givers, because they're really trying to do their best to get to help the kids, to support them. And now during the pandemic, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, you see that the teacher are in the front, at the front of the struggle, because unfortunately we right now we have the worst minister of education. So I don't have much good things to say about education in Israel. Also, I was because I come from I'm a white Jew, white Jew, Ashkenazi Jew. So I was privileged when I grew up. I went to good schools, not like non-white kids, in Israel. I'm not talking about not only about Arab, but kids from non-Western countries, Jewish kids. So I was privileged, but universities are good, but they're going down the drain now again. Our university are quite good, but they're going down the drain now also.
Thanks, Urella. I would just like to reference our Salon number 5. You can find the video on our website, and one of our guest speakers, Chiki Estrada, spoke about her Montessori school, which has to do with children from ages 18 months to 6 years old, and the infusion of the gift economy in their support system, how it echoes out into their families. But Jen, I wondered if you had any input to your where it ties back into the theory.
Well, I just say that really our educational system is a carrier of the disease of capitalism and racism and militarism and so forth. And I think that although teachers try to give the gifts of knowledge to children, what they have to teach is so often biased and really not the truth. And since I think that we really need to go back and start over again to base everything on the gift economy of mothers, on the, let's say, unilateral gifting rather than on exchange and the market. I know we are not teaching that anywhere, and it needs to be, the paradigm needs to shift so that we can begin to bring that unilateral way consciously back into our daily discourse and educational discourse.
Thanks, Jen. I just wanted to point out, Peggy actually has mentioned a couple of different times slavery and the point of going back. And from my point of view, as a Filipino woman who is in diaspora from the islands, raised in the United States, one of the things that those of us who are in diaspora must do to be able to survive is sort of decolonize. And that's deconstructing a lot of what the contemporary social systems are about, to root back to our own culture. And for me, the gift economy and mothering is the reference of what it means to be human. And I think that was the most significant thing that the gift economy has brought to us as a thread, that our humanity is what creates that a bond in our relationships, and how important that is. And again, I want you to look back at some of, actually at the very first conference that we did, one of our speakers, Darcia, Jen, what's her last name? Darcia?
Narvaez.
Darcia Narvaez. If you go back to that very first conference, Darcia has some wonderful things to describe really what we're sort of having to deconstruct at the reference of who we are as human beings, so that we can come from this place of awareness, and what Jen often talks about is being able to see the gift and the relationship of the maternal, the mother. And what we're trying to offer here is to lift all of that confusion and the veil of what patriarchy and capitalism has sort of covered up our eyes. So I think it is time for, let's see, Judith, do you have another question? Oh, yes, Urella.
Yeah, there is a question here. Catherine asked about our opinion on instituting changes within existing institutions, more women in politics and governments. And since it's one of the main issues that they've been bothering me throughout my feminism, I want to talk about, to react. I think generally I would say that both as a radical feminist and as a gift economy supporter, practitioner, whatever, I don't believe in existing institutions, and I don't believe in changing the institution from within. I spent quite a few years in the police headquarters. I spent many years in researching policing all over in Israel, and my conclusion is there's no way to change the police of any other institution from within. I think, for example, gift giving. I think we have to practice gift giving. It's very difficult to practice gift giving. Real gift giving, not just kind of nurturing, care, being friendly to colleagues. I'm talking about changing the world, changing reality. We have to build the gift giving world from below. From below, we have to begin develop gift giving initiatives. From outside the institution. The institutions are too much exchange oriented or interest oriented or politics oriented, and also the same like building communes, building cooperatives, building gift giving communes, gift giving circles. I think we can do it only outside the main institutions. I hardly believe that we can change the institutions, even if we, many of us get in. For example, just one last sentence, now we have in Israel quite a few senior women, in senior police positions, and quite many women police officers. They haven't changed the institution. The institution is still militaristic, is still oppressing the Palestinians. It still doesn't deal well with violence against women. They're very patriarchal, very patriarchal. The culture, the police culture is so masculine, is so, it was, so I don't believe we can change it from within. I think we have, yeah, I believe we have to build the public order, institute new public order institutions that will be gift-giving, will be restorative justice, like we learned from the indigenous people, you know, using restorative. I have a paper about restorative policing, you know, it just change the whole institutions. But they cannot present it to the police and ask, you know, do the changes. They will never do the changes because it's so contradictory to their culture, to their way of thinking. And so I'm sorry if I get a little bit excited, but this is an issue that bothered me so many years, many years. Thank you for
Thank you,
listening.
Urella. So Peggy, I don't know if you heard that whole question, but let me, if you need me to repeat it, I can.
Yes, you could repeat it, but I just wanted to focus on the thing about change coming from within or without. But
That's exactly
yeah,
what she's talking about. Yes.
yeah. So I agree with Erella that it's that I don't expect change is from within certain institutions. I don't. That is the reason that I have very little patience with people who want to see more women in government, or you know, more women heading organizations, more women heading banks and companies. I mean, that does not impress me. In the Caribbean, we've had the present Prime Minister in Barbados is the 4th woman Prime Minister we've had. The other 3 never stood up for women. I'm not sure that the one in Barbados would stand up for women. The fact that she's there is because she's made compromises with the men. And that is not to say she is doing a fantastic job, but the institution itself, I think, is very compromised. It's very patriarchal, and I agree you can't change it from inside. At the same time, I don't think that the communes and the cooperatives and the circles are an alternative. I think we need those. We need those spaces for sure. But we need the state. We have to have a state. We have to have a state. Maybe in the Caribbean, I have a slightly different experience of the state, of the role of the state, because our states are post-colonial states. Well, I don't want to say too much about our present set of leaders because I don't really have a lot of respect for them, apart from the one in Barbados. But certainly coming out of colonialism, going back to the 30s, we had a lot of riots, a lot of resistance and on the streets, led to the creation of trade unions. And it's the trade unions, out of the trade unions came our political parties. Many of them, of course, now lost the link with the trade unions, and the trade unions themselves have now become so hand in glove with the corporations that they don't necessarily represent the interests of workers either. So, so I'm not going to be one of those who thinks that communes and circles can be an alternative. But I do think that you can change from it without. And I do think my own experience, because I've worked, as I said, I've worked within the government. I set up the Women's Bureau within the government of Jamaica. And I do think my own experience of the most effective way to change things has been that insider and outsider strategy. In other words, you need people on the outside. You need people to throw stones. You need people to be very radical. You need very, very radical people. I myself am not radical in a physical sense, but I think my thinking is fairly radical sometimes, or so my friends tell me. But you need a lot of activism and action on the street. But you also need the people within certain institutions. And these institutions are not monolithic. They're not monolithic. And within those institutions, you have people who are change agents, who want to see change, who recognize the needs for change. When I was working in the Women's Bureau in Jamaica, for instance, I recognized the things I could not do working within the institution. I could not do it, but I could give space to people on the outside. I could recognize the need for people to do what they were doing on the outside, including women within a political party. The most effective kind of transformation I ever witnessed myself was the way in which a small group of feminists working within the political party in Jamaica at a certain point in time completely transformed that party. That's not there anymore, because that's the other thing you have to recognize, that those changes are not permanent. No change is final. Each generation has to work for itself. You can leave a legacy, and we have a legacy of social justice in the Caribbean, but unless you have leadership that embraces that legacy and works towards it, it's not going to change. So I want to see from the grassroots, I absolutely agree that that's where the change will come from. But the people at that level must be organized, mobilized, conscientized, to put the pressure on those on the inside. And even then, it is going to be very difficult, and no change is final.
Thank you, Peggy.
I will continue.
Jen, do you have any words about the inside, outside, or altogether
Yeah.
idea?
Well, yes. The one thing I have to say now is that climate change is upon us. And so we're going to have to make the changes quickly. And that is going to require a different way of thinking, an overturning of what we've been doing so far. And so we need to envision and embrace something totally different. In fact, let's see, it was, I think about 3 years ago that the UN told us that we had 10 years before the climate was going to change so much that we could not redeem anything. We're going to have a total disaster. So that gives us 7 years. And we can't do a totally gradual change like we would like to.
Thank you, Jen. Yes, I think of our time right now in the notion of the Chinese character for crisis, which is, opportunity and adversity. That we have both things that are coexisting right now, and we need to participate at whatever level that we can, both the inside and the outside. Everyone who has an awareness, I think, would want to prepare for a better future. And if we keep going back to this notion of what it means to be human and what it means from the point of view of mothering, of caring, unilateral caring, the pandemic and the climate crisis has helped us to see that we're all interrelated. These island countries are being severely affected by the choices that are being made by large countries and large collective corporate powers. We are not separate entities, and we need to find a way to actually work together. I think all, in the United States, in my lifetime, while, gay marriage, we had to go state by state. It took many years, but eventually the whole country changed as a law. And it seems very slow. But I think in our lifetime, if we put our effort forward, it inspires people. It gives people a map to be able to have the courage to continue to move forward. And I just want to applaud each of our panelists, Jen, Urella, and Peggy, for your tenacity to just drill down and be persistent all of these years. So Judith, do you have a question for us?
There are two, before I ask the next question, there are two people joining the conversation about education. Frida says, teachers, including her sister, are unacknowledged frontline workers, and during COVID, they are not being offered vaccinations in many places. And she agrees with Jen that working for grades turns education into exchange. And Eileen Silva says this is relatable everywhere. Unfortunately, in Brazil, in the Netherlands, in England, she's seen the same pattern. And the question, which picks up on what Letitia has just been saying, is how do you see, is from Eve K, and it's how do you see matriarchy, and I would add, and the gift economy dealing with safety and war, as well as with big industries such as manufacturing and cars?
Oh my, who's ready to tackle that question first? Urella?
I'm not sure I have an answer. You know, it's not that. I think my vision is a society of small communes, and I don't mind that one commune will be the builders of machine or cars. You know, I don't want to be part of this commune, but if there is a commune that wants to build machines or cars or new technology, it's okay. I mean, as long as they do it, they choose to do it. I mean, we have to think. What I'm trying to say, and I tried to say in my presentation, is we have to think. We have to take a different look, a different understanding of the society, or at least the vision of society. I don't want a big state. I don't want a big, manufacturers. I don't want. I mean, if we live on a gift economy, if the gift economy is the main economy, so I'll teach him women's studies, and he will give me a car. I don't know. This is a gift. I don't know. Not one for one, because this is exchange. But we have to think differently. We have to think that we share, about sharing. We have to think about technology or growth is not my main interest. And I think we have to think about technology in different. I want technology to be a gift-giving technology. I want technology that is shared with me, that they don't just sit in high-tech offices and build a new world or go to the stars. Or I don't want to go out space. It's not a vision of my world. I think we have. What I'm trying to say is we have to rethink everything if we adopt the gift economy or the matriarchal way of thinking. We have to start thinking differently about everything, including about technology and about cars and about whatever. I don't have the right answer, but what I'm suggesting is just a different kind of thinking, a different kind of outlook, a different kind of analysis. And if we start from there, we can find a new understanding of the role of technology, a social role of technology.
Perfect. Thank you, Urella. I don't think there's a single answer. I think that we all are trying to figure it out. Peggy, do you have any input to this question or comments?
I have an input, no answer. I have an input, but no answer. I certainly agree we need a different way of thinking about everything. I also think that small is beautiful. I think that small scale makes things possible. So decentralization and large countries, even in the Caribbean. You know, the hope I have in Barbados is about Barbados, because each small island is different. It has a different history. I really do believe that whatever we do has to be grounded in our own experience, our own values and traditions. So I want to ground everything here in Barbados. But what is possible here may not be possible in other places. But what it does is to show it is possible. I think this is one of the reasons that the United States is so anti-Cuba, because Cuba shows it's possible. I think that's why what happened to Haiti, because the Haitian Revolution showed what was possible. I do think that there are possibilities in small states, in decentralized governance that is not there with the larger ones. That's the only contribution I could make to this, but I don't have an answer. There's no one answer either. The only thing that is clear is that we have to change. And I think that COVID is making that possible.
Thanks, Peggy. Jen,
I want to add something, because I see one of the questions here, the comments here by Aline Silva. I want to say that two things. One, that I like the example of Venezuela, of what Chavez tried to build was what they call the communal state. It's both a state. They have the state, the central state, but they have the communes. Everything is communes, and everybody is participating in it. I think it's a very interesting model, and we have to, and it needs more. And it's not so surprising that United States is using both arms and banning and everything to destroy the Venezuela, the Chavez experiments. I think it's a very interesting experiment. And second, I want to say that in Bolivian constitution, they have now what they call the new autonomous local autonomous communities. And in I already participated in the international conference about non-territorial autonomies. And I think non-territorial autonomies is part of the solution, part of the vision, Instead of talking about nationalism, instead of talking about one nation and, fighting about it, struggling, let's respect non-territorial autonomies. And that we can do it in Israel now. In Israel now, they're talking about the new tribes, the secular versus the religious, and the Palestinians, the Jews, whatever. I think if we talk about non-territorial autonomies, everybody can have his or her own communes, and it's very important, the relationship between the autonomies, the sharing, the gift economy, the gift giving, the balance between them, like matriarchal societies. This is the vision. This is my vision.
Thank you, Erella. Genevieve, did you have some words that you wanted to share here?
Well, yes, I agree that alternative thinking is very important. And that's what we're doing in these salons. So I think that we should have more and more women thinking differently and doing their own salons and joining us whenever they want, but we need to create a network of women thinking together, because women are the ones who have not been heard and who have not been the leaders in all of this disaster that has happened over the centuries. And so, and women are the mothers. They are the ones that have experience of doing unilateral giving. So women need to put their heads together. We need new consciousness raising groups or thinking groups of women. And it's easy to do now on Zoom. So that's my thought.
And also we have the Rojava, the Kurdish Rojava community, which is really, something to dream about.
Yeah,
Thank
they're
you.
very-
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Urella. Yes, Liliana, before you ask your next question, I just wanted to let our audience know that is here in our Zoom room that we may not get to all of your questions, but we make sure that your questions and a contact for you are sent to each of our speakers so that if there's something specifically for them, that they hopefully will get back to you. So please don't get overly anxious. And I wanted to point out that we have a couple of our past speakers online with us today. Angela Dolmich has an experiment that she has been doing in Colombia, and this may answer some of the questions that you have not, that we may not be able to get to. Her salon is Salon number 3, and again, you can go to the website. Margarita Rosa Trajido, I think, I'm sorry if I messed up your last name. She was just on February the 13th. So her talk will describe to you how she reclaimed the land, and literally from the land up, quite literally from 10 trees to what now looks like a rainforest, at least to me, because I grew up on a desert. So I don't know rainforest very well. And then I wanted to also remind you that these salons are recorded for your benefit, that, like Jen said, we're hoping that you'll use these as educational and talking points so that you can go deeper into the discussion, both for yourself and bring other people into their awareness around these concepts and inspire each other to start these gift experiments and further your own work and deepen in your own awareness. So Liliana, do you have more questions for us?
Yes, lots. I have one question from Rosemary Ganley. She says the research of Dr. Supriya Garikipati of Liverpool shows that countries led by women have done much better on COVID than countries led by men. Please comment, both speakers, if you would like.
Peggy, would you like to respond to that? Because I think your current leader is a woman.
Yes, yes. And it's very interesting because Mia Motley does not sell herself as a woman or as a feminist. In fact, it was in the context of all the interviews that she gave post-COVID, because Barbados was then, I don't know whether it still is, one of those countries that had the best, ability to kind of contain the virus when it started. And she was interviewed by, among other people, Christiane Amanpour. And I remember the interview in which Christiane Amanpour asked Mia Motley whether she would say that the way she's approaching the COVID crisis is because she's a woman. And Mia did not answer the question directly. She just says, it's because I care. So that was the slogan that she used for her election, Mia cares. So I think it's interesting that when you look at the responses, it's from those countries that are led by women. And I think it's certainly true if you think of what it is that they all had in common. They were decisive and they were compassionate. They were decisive and compassionate. But I want to hasten to say that not all women are compassionate. So that is another story. But certainly it is a very interesting phenomenon that it's the women leaders that have been the most effective. And it's because they have been decisive and compassionate.
Thank you, Peggy. Urella, do you have input for that?
Okay, I know that throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, they talk about these 6 women prime minister that, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. We had Golda Meir in the 70s, and she was very problematic, to say the least. Yes, and so I think we have to look deeply into the culture of these 6 societies. It's not because because this culture made women leaders, that they chose them on a specific time, specific period, and it's not. I don't see. I can see a woman prime minister. I hope a woman next election. We are going to have an election. I hope that my friend Merav Michaeli will be the prime minister. I'll love her. I think it will be great, and she will change Israel. But there's politics, and there are problems, and there's occupation, and there are tensions. There are a lot of internal tensions in Israel now. So I'm not sure that the woman prime minister will make a change. If Merav Michaeli will be chosen, she will make a change, but not a revolution. I think what I'm talking about that's why I'm talking about different world, different paradigm, different way of thinking. It's not enough to be. I don't want a woman who is a capitalist woman, who is pro-capitalism, who is, I don't want such a woman as a prime minister. So we have to. I'm talking. Merav Michaeli is not such a woman. She's a good one. She's from the good one. But I think that not all, if a prime minister is pro-capitalism and pro-exchange and oppression and whatever, she can be. So it depends on the culture. And the culture, I don't think in Israel we have a culture that a woman can, as a prime minister, can do a revolution. It's not enough. I don't want capitalism here. I don't want even post-capitalism. I think it's problematic. I want something else. I want gift economy. I want matriarchal a legacy to be our, so it's a different kind of, we can make changes. We can have women prime minister, but this is not a deep change. This is not the revolution I'm looking for. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Urella. Genevieve, did you have some words that you wanted to share with us?
Well, yes, I agree. We probably wouldn't have prime ministers in a perfect political situation. But I am a feminist, and I believe in women. I just know that the system corrupts people, and the patriarchy has corrupted a lot of men, and it corrupts women too, as does capitalism. So we just have to get lucky and get women who are lucky enough to maintain their sanity when they get to be leaders.
Thanks, Jen. We have a few minutes left, and I'm wondering if there are some closing statements that Peggy, Erella, and Jen would like to offer before we actually close this out. And I'm sorry, again, I want you to all know that we really appreciate your questions, and they will go to each of the speakers. But I wanted to make sure that they were able to wrap up without feeling rushed before we didn't have them again. And we hope we will continue to see them. So, Erella, are there some closing questions, something that has really come up for you that you would like us to know and to offer for us before we actually close out today?
I would say it briefly. I'm looking for the revolution or for revolutionary kind of thinking since I was 9 years old, which is a long time ago. I found it finally in the gift economy, in the maternal gift economy, matriarchal studies, modern matriarchal studies, and indigenous wisdom. I think that these are the places, the perspective where we have to look for a different society, for a different way of thinking, for a different way of being. I mean, for me, it changed my life. It changed my way of thinking. It changed everything. So yeah, and you will be able to read everything in my really forthcoming book in Canada, The Legacy of Mothers. The Legacy of Mother, but published by Inanna. It will be published in a couple of weeks or a few weeks. And I think this is the main thing, is the revolution. And I think we can make it. We can make it. Genevieve began thinking about it when she was, I don't know, in the 70s. And Heidi Abendorf began when she was 21 years old. And now we are a large movement. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of people talking about gift economy and modern matriarchal studies or matriarchies. And I think we have to, and indigenous. I'm tired of the Western culture. I'm tired of Western civilization. I think we need a different, entirely different kind of paradigm, entirely different, and of living, the way we live, a different kind of being. This is, I feel I repeated myself.
As a good teacher, you know that sometimes you must repeat central theories over more than one time for people to really understand that that's a prime thesis that you're trying to get across. So thank you so much, Erella. Peggy, are you there? I see your picture. Maybe you're a bit frozen. Genevieve, we'll come back to Peggy. Do you have some words you'd like to share here?
Yes, I agree with Erella. And I think that women have been cut out of history as the leaders because patriarchy is so much more violent and stronger in many of its ways, as is the market, which is able to trick us into believing that it's the only main thing that there is. It is reality. But there is another reality, and that is the reality that of who we are as Homo donans, not just Homo sapiens. Homo donans is the giving and receiving being, not the knowing being only. And so we need to reconceptualize ourselves as a species, as giving and receiving beings, and not just go through the market and not just have every man for himself values, which is what is destroying the earth. And it's very simple, really, this unilateral giving and receiving, but we usually think of it as morality. It's not, it's our basic nature. And we need to go back to that and claim it in order to be in syntony or in continuity with Mother Nature.
Thank you, Jen. Peggy, did you have some words you'd like to offer here in closing?
I don't want patriarchy. I don't want capitalism. I want to change the world. But the question is how? And the question is, what can I do now? So it's not just theoretical. It's not just in the realm of ideas. I do think that we are at a moment that is different from any other moment. And it's a moment that offers possibilities for change, because in a sense, human beings don't have much control over this moment. You see governments who really don't know what to do. Things were going well in Barbados, and then suddenly we have this second wave and the third wave and the fourth wave. And this pandemic I think, has really pulled the rug from under people who think that they're in control. So what I am doing right now, right here on this ground, is using my own wish to see something different, to change thinking, to be that, to do that, to engage with people who also want to see change. And where I come down finally is the recognition of the importance of social relations. And that's really what I'm pushing. Those are the social relations that certainly have its basis in mothering, but we have to find a language and a way of communicating that to people that might be resistant to that kind of language. And finally, unfortunately, I don't want to end on a bad note. I just have to remind us that, as I said before, not all women are compassionate. Not all women want change. Not all women want change. In fact, in my book on the global women's movement, I've said that the best organized women are the ones who don't want change. So we have to contend with that. We have to contend with that. And how we are going to persuade our sistren to want change, that's a long-term project.
Thanks, Peggy. I think that you bring up this notion of this internalized aspect that we have of patriarchy and capitalism and the market. And for those of you who've read Genevieve's theory, she talks a lot about this notion of, the gift of language. That includes how we speak to ourselves and how we speak to each other. In the Philippines, there's a word. Erella brought the word up from Africa, which is Ubuntu. And the Filipinos have a word called kapwa. Kapwa means the self in the other. It means that we are always and forever connected. I cannot know myself or you without me and you being present. That's that social relationship that's so key. But that means that we're interrelated. And because Filipinos are animists, that means that every entity, every being has life force. And for me, when I heard the gift economy theory from Jen, that's what I was taken back to, this place of an interconnected reality that is beyond capitalism. And I agree with Urella, post-capitalism, it goes back to our primary and primal function of what it means to be life in a physical form. And to me, that's the nature of the gift economy. So we want to invite you to continue to join with us in this radical feminist approach of the maternal gift economy to change the world. So I want to thank our guest speakers, Urella and Peggy, for being with us today. It was so delightful and wonderful to have you and to see your images and hear your broad thoughts and your deep feelings. Jen, for your always weaving together this theory of the gift. Our tech support, Diane and Elena, and our ever diligent question gatherers, Judith and Liliana. And also, I want to mention all of the women in the International Feminists for the Gift Economy who've gathered together, the network that has just gathered and shored up Genevieve over the years. Our salons happen every 2 weeks. Our next salon is March the 13th, where we have Mickey Kashtan and Manasi Sexana. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what they have to say. Remember, we've recorded this video and you can watch it again on our website and on YouTube. There will be an announcement that goes out to you for those of you who've registered. But you can always contact us at the maternalgifteconomy@gmail.com or through our website. We just want to thank you all so very much for coming. It's such an important time. So be well, Stay safe, be kind to one another, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. So Urella, Jen, and Peggy, if you're still here, just give a shout out and wave. Judith, Diane, Elena, Liliana, if you want to unmute and wave.
I don't know how to wave, but I'm here. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you again. Bye for now.